morning, good evening, and good afternoon. Welcome to Nysa Presents, where you see what you've been missing in 3D. And hello to you avatars attending in our VR meeting place. I'm your host, Johnny Laser. Welcome to New York, and happy Mother's Day. It's tomorrow, but we could say that a little early. You know, we're always picking interesting days and dates for our show, or shall I say they picked us, because it's a Saturday. If I were into numerology, by now I'd be freaking out. But I digress. We here, and I'm sure all of you there, have an interest in the space program. In fact, we watched a launch together live on our program last year. Turns out today many people are sharing our interest in space, since part of the discarded Chinese rocket fuselage plummets uncontrolled through the atmosphere, hopefully breaking into small enough pieces to only knock someone unconscious and not kill them. Interesting thing about the Chinese space program, they're building a space station. But interestingly enough, the hatches which allow entry and exit from the space station are not compatible with the current International Space Station. What that means is, finally, there's Chinese food in space, but no takeout. If there should be an emergency on either space station, they're going to need to order an adapter plate from Amazon and have it delivered by Elon Musk, who incidentally will be hosting Saturday Night Live tonight. Onward and upward. We got a great show for you today. First up, we have a 3D video from E.JAMES Smith that he took on a helicopter trip as part of his duties as a video engineer. He just snuck his camera aboard and got some great footage over the island of Manhattan. Then we'll share some images from this week's Stereo Gallery party. Then Dave Comeau will dip into depth maps and see if we can relieve some of the confusion associated with that form of 3D processing. All the more important since you'll be receiving your looking glass soon, portrait soon, and understanding depth map manipulation can be a useful tool. Then this week's Anaglyph Jukebox, Frank in the Third Dimension. And one of the contributors to Joe Pedoto show this week is Charles Barnard, co-author of the book. Charles will be our guest on a podcast, so look out for that. Very cool. Actually, my grandson just loves looking at the book. So I know he's got 3D capabilities. He presses the things up to his eyes, and I edit it, though. I don't want to scare the kid. Imagine these guys. They're going to go to Epcot Center one day and go, Anyway, as you know, next week will be our last in a series of 15 shows in a row. It will mark the third time through. So we've actually done this 44 times so far, and actually more. We will be back with special shows in June and in August, so be sure you're on our mailing list so you don't miss any of our mischief. In the meantime, I'll be continuing the podcast with interesting people, so be sure you subscribe, and of course to our YouTube and Vimeo channels also. We will return in September with another 15 episodes and a new look. I'd like to take a moment to thank a great crew who worked tirelessly to keep things interesting and to minimize technical woes that anyone who has participated in or has run a Zoom event is all too familiar with. All in an effort to serve the 3D community. While we've done over 44 shows, if you count the rehearsals, we're well over 100. So please join me in a round of applause for Dave Comeau, Jim Hart, Jamie Smith, David Heiser, Jay Kuznets, and a special thanks to our segment folks, Jim McManus, Joe Pedoto, Gordon Al, Dr. T, and Otai Octanese. Ready, folks? And finally, to all of the presenters and the folks who shared their talent with us over the last year, it's been my great pleasure to have gotten to know them and to share their talent with all of you. And last but not least, those of you who have joined the NYSA, thank you for acknowledging that we're providing something important. We all thank you for your support and generosity in these very complicated times. Now on with the show. I'll put my cans on. There we go. Now, Jamie is a video editor, an engineer, and while in a production, was able to steal some of the time away and create this great experience for us from his helicopter ride. So, without further ado, now for this week's Stereo Gallery Party, we have some images from Jim McManus, who could not be with us today, but will return next week with part 2 of his Life is 3D series. It's a continuation of the behind-the-scenes images from the Kennedy Space Center, and you know Jim does some great shooting. So, I'm going to share screen here, and you know, like always, you don't need to see me, so stand by while I... There we are. Well, what would you do if you opened a hotel room door and you faced this? You'd probably smile and close the door as fast as you possibly could and check out of the hotel. But nonetheless, I'm going to overuse that today if you don't mind. Wonderful bunch of folks here. Um, I could name them, but you know who they are. If you either know them or you don't, and if you don't know them, it's not going to help me point them out. But wonderful bunch of 3D people. Some of the most wonderful people in 3D. Yeah, yeah. 2018. Wow, how time flies. All a bunch of great folks. Barry was on last week with us, as a matter of fact. David Starkman, all good people. And some guy in the back. Who is that guy back there? I'll forget him. Oh, here's that crew again. Now, the story's been told like 10 times already, but it is kind of funny. Imagining the hotel staff, like they send somebody up, security, because as you can imagine, this room got, if you know all these personalities, it wasn't a quiet room. So they sent up the nice lady who opened the door to see this. And she's extremely kind. And I think somebody gave her some anaglyphs. There was a trade made, and there was no problem, and we all finished our bottles and careened down the hall, embarrassingly. No, it was a great, wonderful bunch of people. And here's the ladies of 3D. Was this the same show, Dave? Do you think? Oh, that's right. Because here's the thing: if we have to narrate them, it, you wouldn't want to be around during the rehearsals because we could make a lot of interesting stuff up. So you're far better off, and we'd love to have your version on this. So these are the nice ladies they're wonderful. So be forewarned. In a kitchen somewhere, I would imagine in Florida. Oh, yeah, indeed. We invite him over to carve the turkey on Thanksgiving. That's about it. He's a turkey surgeon. You need one of those. And we have an advertiser for Simra. This is the spokesman for Simra, whatever that is. That's the Society of Indigent. You can figure it out. Oh, this good, David. Yeah, and hey, so part two of NASA next week, but also part two of these images. Let's find out from Jim exactly what was going on here. Oh, and we got a nice shot from who just came in, William Clare, I remember. And he shot this image just recently this week in a walk through Thompson Square Park in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which is near where the skate park that David Hazan took his pictures from a few meetings ago, if you recall. It's not too far, and actually this is the park that has the monument to the Slocum disaster, which, if you don't know about it, I'll probably tell you 10 times about it. But Steamboat Fire, which was the largest loss of life in New York City due to a fire until 9/11, and they launched not from far from here. But that was kind of a downer for this picture. But this is a really really cool picture. Yeah, it is a lot more helpful when people come along to. Bill, are you out there? I should have actually. If you're out there, I hope. Yes. Did I do a good job? Perfect. Got the thumb. Good. Good. If I had a choice for secretary, I'd rather have one that sat on my lap. But no, only kidding out there. Only kidding out there. Dave Comeau, who is the official secretary of the New York Stereoscopic Association, and a resident brilliant guy who does so much that we'll give another round of applause. Even before he does this. Yeah. Indeed. No, hey Dave, I was avoiding this button. I don't use that often. But anyway, take it away, Dave.
All right. So lately, as the world of computers continues to wend its way into the stereo photography world, the term depth map is heard more and more often. So, what exactly is a depth map, you might wonder? I'm here to bring you out of the depth and into the shallow end. This presentation is going to cover part one, what a depth map is, part two, where depth maps can be used, and part three, how to make depth maps. We'll cover the categories noted in parts 2 and 3 in more detail in future videos. Watch till the end to see something that, to my knowledge, has never been done before. Ooh. Now let's understand the depth map and how it can help us in the world of stereoscopic 3D photography. As the slide says, the depth map, Webster's dictionary defines a depth map, or Wikipedia defines a depth map as simply an image that contains information relating to the distances of seen objects from a viewpoint. Okay, so given an image, we can have another image associated with it that represents how close the objects are to the camera. So here we have, you can see in the background, we have these objects are very dark, the background and all the trees. And then the fountain in the middle is lighter, and then it gets very lighter as we get close with these little flowers and vases toward the front. So that's your depth map that you're going to be looking for. If you've ever seen a raised relief map, remember the ones from grade school where the mountains are all bumpy and you can run your fingers over them? This is an example of turning a 2D object, a topographical map, which shows elevation numbers. If we were to zoom in, we could see little numbers on here. And we can turn that into a physical 3D object by sort of extruding the depth higher, the higher the elevation gets. So let's see, let's click to look here. Here's another image that we stuck toward the end where you can see that the circles represent kind of the elevation going up. And you can see, like, as if it were a mountain, this is the peak of the mountain. So just looking at the images again, this is kind of representation of the mountains. And if we were to consider on the left, this is the elevation of those mountains. Let's put it more in terms of computer depth maps. So for our purposes, we're generally going to use 8-bit grayscale depth maps. So we are allowed 256 shades of gray. So over here on the left, we're going to change our elevation to be just different shades of gray. And what we can say in this point is that looking straight down as if we were the sun, we're going to say that the sun is equal to about 255, and then anything close to the sun is going to be closer to 255, right? So then as we move away from the sun, our numbers further decrease and get darker and darker into black. And I'm just going to show you, if we were to take a aerial photograph from Google Maps and then take a depth map, where here the dark represents the ground and the white represents the mountains, and the gray is in between. If we were to lay this on top of this depth map, then we would end up with kind of a 3-dimensional object that looks and feels kind of like the real California. Now, just to point out that before, when I was showing you, we had white being the closest to us and black being the furthest away. You don't actually need to do that with depth maps. You know, you can also have black being the closest forward, where white is the most far away. Okay, so different programs will need different types of depth maps. So you'll get pretty adept at figuring out just what looks right and what looks wrong, and then when you need to flip it. And it's really easy to reverse the depth map in Stereo Photo Maker. So here are some sample depth maps. On the left, we have the image, the red, green, blue RGB 2D image, and then we have a depth map. So here, furthest away is just this black, all in the background, and here we have kind of an extreme, he's holding the bottle right there. And what we can do is just pretend like we saw before with the mountains. If you were to drape this image on the left on top of this image, it would all be kind of draped coming down from that bottle, and we would have kind of a depthy relief map. Again, here's another depth map, corresponding RGB image. So the water is kind of black back there, and he's pointing this thing toward the front. So it's white. It's coming out close. And we're going to move along. So part 2. So how can we use these depth maps? And we're here for Stereo 3D, right? So you're saying get to it. Well, not quite yet. Once we have this depth map, we can do a number of interesting things. What we can do is actually blur the background of our 2D image. And we can do that pretty easily in Stereo Photo Maker, right? So we have this option, which pops up, and we can click, and if you can see the background is getting a little bit more blurry, when I click apply, then it's just going to change that photo. Okay. Another thing we can do is create a stereo pair from our 2D image plus the depth map, right? So creating a stereo pair, hooray, finally we're talking about 3D. So on the left is a very simple 2D image of the Earth that I found on the internet. And on the right is a simple circular gradient depth map, and I'll talk about how I created that later. Notice this depth map is reversed. So in this case, black is going to be toward the viewer. So this could also be, for this conversion process, we could use any kind of 2D image that we have, and if we've manually created a extravagant depth map in Photoshop, we could be using that. But anyway, I'll talk about all that later. So here we've gone into Stereo Photo Maker, and as I said, there's an option under Edit for depth map. You can do a whole bunch of really fun things in here. And this is this Create 3D Image from 2D depth map. So that's going to give you the stereo pair. And I also talked about before this reverse depth map. So sometimes I might want to use that to flip that image around. Okay, and so if you want to grab your Anaglyph glasses, you can pop them on, and you will see that we've created a pretty decent approximation of the Earth. And this is important. I always like to say that conversion is conversion, right? So we can never create that little bit of Europe to the right in this image, right? This piece of data in our source that we converted is just never going to be there, but we can shift it enough to make it convincing. Another thing we can do with depth maps is we can create a Facebook 3D photo. So if you've been on Facebook, you may have seen on the desktop browser or the app, there's this kind of little way you can easily drag the depth map and stuff across. And then you end up with this funny little, oops, that wasn't supposed to happen. You end up with this, this little moving image, which is nice. You can drag it back and forth. But you'll see when we drag it back and forth that we're going to be missing some information behind his head. Like we said, the source image doesn't have what the water looks like behind there. So we're kind of stuck with Facebook blurring it out for us. So that's my little cousin Seamus there. And this is the image we saw before of the fountain. Again, easily done on Facebook. And then this is one that someone else made. And they must have done this manually in Photoshop or something. So they took the 2D image album cover from an Iron Maiden album, and they just drew a depth map. And they could even create a stereo pair from this if they wanted to, because they have the depth map and the image. So we may come back to that in a little bit. We shall see. Another thing we can do with depth maps is we can display images in the looking glass or print lenticular images. So we've talked about the looking glass before in Nysa Presents, and a number of us have ordered the looking glass portrait, which is display. I'm going to show you an example on the older portrait display. And we can use Stereo Photo Maker or Looking Glass Factory software, or Masuji Suto has also made a web viewer, which help us view depth maps and images in the looking glass. So here's a looking glass, and I'm moving it. And up, it looks pretty good. Up near his head, there is a little bit of like speckling because it doesn't quite know what to do with the water back there. And what we've done is created 45 or more different images from that source 2D image and depth map. And now we're displaying it in this display. And then this image, again, we saw this bottle, and it looks a little bit worse because we're trying to look behind the bottle, and there's just nothing there. The computer's trying to fill it in. So if you ever want full occlusion and you truly want to look around things, it's best to take a series of lenticular style photos, or at least a stereo photo for better conversion. Oh. Okay, one more thing you can do is create depthy models for VR. I'm not really going to talk much about this because you're better off just taking a bunch of photos around an object and then using photogrammetry to stitch it all together. But you could use a depth map and for this purpose if you wanted to. And then finally, this is exciting, you can use in-painting and other artificial intelligence improvements. So I mentioned, for example, before that you can never pull in that part of Europe that wasn't in the source we used for the conversion. But AI is making larger strides every day and is able to fill in the backgrounds in a way we wouldn't have thought possible even a year ago. Right, so remember this image of my cousin Seamus here. So if we look around his head, you'll notice that the software is able to kind of figure out, it moves a tiny bit, but it's pretty good for it just converting. And it also, this free software, which is, did I say what this was called? Yeah, this is in-painting. It allows us to get that kind of effect you might see on TV documentaries. Oops. All right, so let's move on. So finally, how can we create these depth maps that I've showed you? I've alluded to it a little bit. We'll just step through. So the first way is you can start with we're starting with a 2D image, and we want to make a depth map from it. So the first way is the most difficult, which is manually creating it in Photoshop. You're going to create a grayscale image from scratch. That can be time consuming and requires some decent Photoshop skills. But I know at least some of the folks in this meeting used to get paid to do that very thing. So another way to create a depth map is to make a gradient shape in Stereo Photomaker or Photoshop or some other image program. For example, that Earth depth map I made earlier was done using Stereo Photomaker. So back in Stereo Photomaker, I went to depth map. Oops. Control. I went to depth map, make depth map, and Stereo Photomaker just gives me some different things like a cylinder or a rectangle if I wanted to do a pyramid or something, or a ball. All right, so it makes it easy if you just have some kind of a basketball or a globe or something like that to easily make a depth map you can use. And then the last way is to use some artificial intelligence. So I'm going to show you something that I did with something called Midas. So this is taking just this 2D image. We run it through this Midas program, which is free, and it does some kind of applies some machine learning to it, and it comes up with this. It's a decent depth map. It's got a fountain. It's missing those little, I keep clicking the wrong button. It's missing those little things in the front, but it's a decent job for computer software, and it's getting better over time. Another method we can use is modern mobile smartphones or tablets. So if you have used the portrait mode on your camera app on the Android or iOS, you're already creating depth maps. So remember that background blurring I showed you earlier? That's the same feature you can do on phones in portrait mode. So the phone has created a depth map and is using it to apply the blur. So here I'm just giving you an example from my iPhone 11. I took a portrait photo. I actually chose to kind of black out the background, and the system has saved this depth map so that when I bring it into Stereo Photomaker, it gives me this depth map already. And you can see it's a little rough and a little chunky because it's trying to kind of do its thing. Over here, the iPhone 12 has better sensors on it. I won't go into those, but this is one I cribbed from the Looking Glass website. So I believe Sean Freen took it. And you can see that the resolution of this depth map is a lot more detailed with the scarf and everything. And so that will result in much better converted content later on down the line. And then just down below, this is another example of where I went into Stereo Photo Maker and I said, let's create a stereo pair from a 2D image plus a depth map. And if you were really to zoom in, you can see that this, since this depth map is so rough, it kind of made some weird things on the cheek a little bit. I could probably go in here and I could clean this up around the face. You can actually do that in Stereo Photo Maker, or you can do that in Photoshop. Okay, and finally, we can create a depth map from a stereo pair. And this is really my preferred method of creating the depth maps, if I have a stereo pair. So here I say we can use DMAG along with Stereo Photo Maker. So DMAG is created by Ugo Capetto, and it's a really great program which can be run standalone or attached to Stereo Photo Maker for seamless conversion. So once it's hooked up, you have a lot of information you can type in, and you may need to do some manual cleanup and some tweaking. So just like with stereo 3D photos, sometimes you'll think something's really going to look good in 3D and it doesn't, but the same applies here. So with some practice, you can get a feel for what works and what doesn't. So here is me taking my stereo pair, and this is my very first conversion. I didn't do much cleanup, but it worked out pretty well. So sometimes with this, you'll try to make a tweak and it'll just be worse, and then you'll have to go back. So like with anything, a bit of trial and error will get you places. So I was curious about how this held up to the artificial intelligence. So on the top, you see me using this stereo pair with DMAG, and at the bottom is the Midas. So you can see that the trees are a lot more pronounced in the depth map from pair. We get these little vases in the front. So it did a lot better job, but again, not too bad for some artificial intelligence. And there are some other things to do that I'm not going to go into. Like you could go in and apply a blur, like a Gaussian blur or something to this in Photoshop, just to make your results better. But that's it. Oh, I did say that there was one thing that had never been done. And for years, some of us have been trying to figure out how to record Facebook 3D photos. So before I showed you moving back and forth in Facebook. And I neglected to mention that in VR, when you look at that photo, you can actually see depth. So here is a video of that. We're looking at that Iron Maiden video or image from before. So in this case, this is the Oculus Quest, and I've adjusted it a little bit to accommodate distortion and everything. And here we have real depth in 3 dimensions. And again, this was just him taking a 2D image and creating a manual depth map. So that's really it. Top level look at depth maps, what they are, where they can be used, and how to create them. And I'll go into depth in future videos on the usage and creation of the different categories we discussed, and put it up on YouTube, and hopefully get together a list of resources for the Fancy Glyph page for you for next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, John.
I'm coming up for air. I was that was very interesting. A couple of things that kind of are a little bit of a roadblock in grasping that. At this point, I'm using them, but there's a part, that fundamental part, I'm trying to grasp it. So really, what's happening, and just follow me on this one. So if you're using a iPhone, right, the fancy ones, 11 or the 12. The reason the 12 looked a little bit better with Sean was, I guess, the hardware, a combination of the hardware and the software, which is able to generate that more accurate depth map. Am I all right so far? Am I gone down the right path?
That is correct. The iPhone 12 has a LiDAR which sends out a burst of light. I think it's infrared light, and it measures the time of flight, the amount of time it takes to come back. So it bounces off of every object. It's much like when you use the Face ID to open up your phone. That's the same thing that that front-facing camera is doing, in a sense. But I think that the earlier versions just are using more software to process it, where that LiDAR is really that's what they really use to map.
It's doing more heavy lifting. Yep.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
And now, okay, so you have that. So I understand the AI component, the artificial intelligence component, right? Now, whether it's DMAG or the other one, Midas, right? That the interpretation of that data that you brought in, that is that being done in the cloud, or is it something that clever people have figured out to code in? In other words, they figured out how to manage depth and wrote an algorithm. Because I'm still at a quandary about how how your nephew there, even though you said it wasn't good, to me, it filled in pretty damn good. And how did it know to fill that in as well? It was a long question. Sorry about that.
Sure. No, and it's kind of like 3D, right? Where we can usually look at something and tell if it's a conversion or not. It's getting harder and harder because the tools are getting more robust, right? But sometimes we can kind of look and say, oh, that Coca-Cola can, you can't see around that. So they look pretty good for normal folks that aren't really inspecting it and trying to break it down. The depth maps, the different software. It's what's great is that Ugo is around in the community, and he's on Facebook and everything, and can answer questions. And I think he may be using for DMAG, for that stereo pair thing, it's kind of edge detection. So you can it looks at different quadrants, and it tries to figure that out. Not totally sure, and maybe we can talk about it more in the after party. And then what the AI is doing is that's machine learning, I believe. So I think it's figured out what different shapes are, and it applies that knowledge to what you give it.
And that's interesting. So that would be,
that's my understanding.
Yeah. Yes. And I know it's a deep subject. Hold on. But because that's the part that gets me. It's like, is it written in? So when he writes the program, he's drawing from the AI knowledge to build that outside. That's the part that's getting me, because I think I know what's happening. It's using the geometry of the image to kind of figure out what's in the background and what's in the foreground based on all that AI knowledge. Am I going down? Is that something I'm going down the right path?
Perhaps we can have him back if we can't figure it out in the after party. We can maybe send up follow-up questions to him, and maybe have him as a guest in the future.
Thank you very much, Dave. You were phenomenal. This is a shot. This is like, I don't know if you can see this. Let's see if you can see this. When yank his shit around. This is out of you can't really.
So that's the new one. That's the new looking glass portrait.
Right. This is like a shot. I don't know if you could see it in there.
That's a vertical base, and that's shipping soon for the pre-order Kickstarters.
But you could I guess you could see there's a little movement. Yeah, you could see the movement in there in the background. That's actually Arthur C. Clarke holding a stereo realist, which I gave him. But I can't. And believe it or not, well, I know it's very hard to see it. Let me come back. Yeah. There we go. But what you can see like his computer in the background, right? You can kind of see that his head is blocking it. And
I just can't really focus on something that moves quickly. So.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm looking at it because I know what it looks like. But
yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah, but I.
Yeah. So here's the point. This was just a photograph that was taken. It's a photograph of a photograph, and it was able to do that extrapolation. In other words, I know it's hard to see that, but it's actually pretty damn good 3D, but it was done in the cloud. It was not done. I did not do that myself. So that was done like cloud stuff, you know.
I think they say it works on mirrors too. So if you have a mirror in the photo, the things in the mirror get built out like they're reality.
It is kind of baffling how they manage it, but I'm intrigued by it because I think understanding it a little more deeply, I'd be able to actually utilize it more efficiently. But what you did was, I think you brought a lot, you shed a lot of light on it. Thank you, because really that was, you definitely left me better than you found me. You know, I understand a lot more about it now. So
Thank
it's
you.
almost like
Thanks so much.
I could. Oh, thank you, man. That was great. It's almost like I could do it, but I'd like to know a little bit more about what the hell I'm doing. That would be that's the thing that's giving me any issues. But like anything else, and Dave, I think everybody will attest to it. You can imagine you're doing it a lot. The trick is to go do it, and once you start doing it, it all becomes something that flows. You know, because you're all above average intelligence people. I know that. Okay, so before we begin this week's Anaglyph Jukebox, here's the creator of the Anaglyph Jukebox, Joe Pedoto, and he'll explain a little bit about Frank in the third dimension. Joseph, take it away.
John, usually the Anaglyph Jukebox deals with important, weighty, and historic subject matter, like comic books and strippers from 60 to 80 years ago. And everybody we talk about has passed away long ago. The comic artists, the live nude models, and even the 3D conversion artists. But today's edition features a living contemporary artist, Jim Woodring, and an amazing 3D conversion artist, Charles Barnard, who we hope to have on an upcoming podcast to really pick his brain. Through the generosity of Charles, the images you're about to see were taken from his original digital files. These are not my scans from a printed book. And as such, John and the entire audience, you're going to see the detail is amazing.
And you guys, thank you very much, Joe. That's a good lead in. And you folks in VR and also using the fancy clip, Jake Kuznets did these wonderful conversions into side by side. So they didn't exist until now, till he did it, till Jay did it. So if you're in VR or you have a TV set, you're going to be able to see these in their other glory. But they were intended as Anaglyph, so even if not, they're absolutely phenomenal. You're not going to miss anything. But if you're down there, you're going to see a huge screen. You're going to see very small, and you're going to see some cool stuff. It'll probably give you nightmares, but don't let that bother you. Okay, you can run it if you don't mind, there, Dave.
Welcome to today's edition of the Anaglyph Jukebox. You never know what you'll find on the old jukebox. Let's press B31. Okay, we've got Frank in the Third Dimension by Jim Woodring, 3D Conversions by Charles Barnard. The Jukebox would like to quote Oliver Sava, writing in the AV Club on February 2nd, 2016. Quote, "The back cover of Jim Woodring and Charles Barnard's Frank in the Third Dimension, Fantagraphics books, taunts that it has the most startling volumetric 3D ever printed. And while that may sound like hyperbole, it really is a major accomplishment in anaglyphic 3D illustration. Woodring brings a lot of dimension to his 2D art by using wavy lines of varying thickness to shade figures and create specific textures. And Barnard breaks Woodring's intricate drawings down into hundreds of individual layers that are slightly modified, making many small changes that add up to create images with breathtaking depth. Most anaglyphic comics use this illusion of depth to simply create distance between flat planes of artwork. but Barnard's meticulous conversion process creates volume within the individual planes, accentuating the texture of Woodring's line and giving the figures more weight. A wonderful description from Oliver, the proof of which you're observing right now. But who are Jim Woodring and Charles Barnard? Ever eager to have others do the heavy lifting around here, the Jukebox will turn to Walter Foxglove on Goodreads for his excellent and concise bio of Jim Woodring. Note for the slower kids. Paranoia is a medical condition involving an excess of morbid dreams and nightmares. Paracousia is an auditory hallucination that involves perceiving sounds without auditory stimulus. Quote, Jim Woodring was born in Los Angeles in 1952 and enjoyed a childhood made lively by an assortment of mental and psychological quirks, including paranoia, paracousia, apparitions, hallucinations, and other species of psychological and neurological malfunction amid the snakes and tarantulas of the San Gabriel Mountains. He eventually grew up to be an inquisitive, bear-like man who has enjoyed 3 exciting careers: garbage collector, merry-go-round operator, and cartoonist. A self-taught artist, his first published works documented the disorienting hell of his salad days in an illustrated autojournal called Jim. This work was published by Fantagraphic Books and collected in The Book of Jim in 1992. He is best known for his wordless comic series depicting the follies of his character Frank, a generic cartoon anthropomorph whose adventures careen wildly from sweet to appalling. A decade's worth of these stories was collected in The Frank Book in 2004. The 2010 Frank story, Weathercraft, won the Stranger's Genius Award and was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize for that year. The most recent Frank book, Congress of the Animals, was released in 2011. Charles Barnard is a digital artist and video game industry veteran from Stockton, California. From 2013 to 2020, he took over 3D conversion duties for the late Ray Zone on Aaron Warner's Gone Mad, an ongoing comic featured in Stereo World magazine. In 2017, Charles was nominated for an Eisner Award for his 3D conversion work on Jim Woodring's picture book, Frank in the Third Dimension. And in 2019, he, along with conversionist Christian LeBlanc, converted 17 pages of Alan Moore's limited comic book series, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Tempest, to full-color Anaglyph. The Origin of Frank in the Third Dimension, the book, by Charles Barnard. In May of 2013, I reached out to cartoonist Jim Woodring, asking him if I could convert one of his black and white cartoon drawings to anaglyphic 3D. Permission was granted, and I created the conversion and emailed it to Jim. He confessed to not having 3D glasses, so I mailed him a pair and quickly received a response. The job you did with the Frank drawing was a real eye-opener. It is, without a doubt, the best 2D to 3D work I've ever seen. The sense of ground being a plane, the smooth transitions, the grace of the placement of the elements, a complete and utter pleasure to contemplate. Thanks so much for doing this, and of course, for the glasses. He proposed we should collaborate, and Frank in the Third Dimension was born. Though I had been converting comics for Stereo World magazine's Gone Mad comic feature for a couple of years at that point, the level of detail in Jim's plates was astonishing. I had to upgrade my computer and methods to handle the huge, high-resolution files he was tossing my way. I had estimated 7 months to convert the 27 plates, including covers, necessary for the book. Due to lack of experience with a conversion project of this size, it was an underestimation, and I found myself having to work 6 to 7 days a week, averaging 12 to 13 hours a day to hit the deadline. I delivered the last file on May 1st, 2015, exactly as scheduled, and then the waiting began for the publisher to prep it for printing in China. My number one concern with this project was print quality, and I expressed it early on with Jim and the publisher. I knew with high contrast black and white line work, the best anaglyphic separation would require two-color, custom color ink printing. Ordinary CMYK or digital printing was not going to cut it, as ghosting would likely be extreme. Fortunately, Fantagraphics is a premier publisher of comic art-related books, so they were no stranger to the exacting specifications of the creators they worked with. They followed my specs to the letter and prepared the printing to my PMS color specifications, which were the same ink specifications used by Ray Zone for many years to print his line of comic books. In the modern age, proof checking is done with a digital print, but for the color accuracy required, Fantagraphics went the extra mile and sent a wet proof made of several pages, actually mixing the inks and press printing it exactly as the final book would be. By fall of 2015, I had 2 proofs in my hand, and the color was perfect, yielding a terrific 3D effect. I could finally sleep. The book hit shelves in early February 2016 and was met with moderate success. Today, the book is largely sold out and considered rare, with prices ranging from $200 to $400 a copy. Spain released a Spanish-language version titled Peekaboo, Frank, that is still available and, aside from a cover change in Spanish language, is in every other way identical to the American edition.
That was excellent. And thank you, Joseph, for taking us I know more now about Batman. I knew enough about National Lampoon, but after the other weeks, and also about huge images. If you get my drift, you have really brought us up to a whole notch. So I do appreciate that, and those are, I do them, and I can't wait to see them. Because they're really that good. Thank you so much for that work. So, he explained that, by the way. I gotta stop giving this to my, he can do what he wants with it. $200, how do you like that? Get the Spanish one, but you will not be disappointed in this book. I can tell you that. Find it, you will not be disappointed. And it was so good that I think I hallucinated hearing a dog bark. I think the cat sounded like a dog bark. That's amazing. I was like a flashback. Thank you very much there, Joseph, for all of that. Anyway, so we finished this week. This week's show. Just want to thank you folks for kindly dropping in. I'm going to leave you with a 2D picture that's a scan from a 16 millimeter film. Hold on. I'll explain that in a moment. Oh, there we go. I'll leave you with that shot, which is a 2D picture that's a scan from a 16 millimeter film. I call it me, Mom, and my dad. My father had a 16 millimeter movie camera and was able to scan this image. That redheaded kid in the foreground went on to create a load of mischief. So on behalf of all of us here, happy Mother's Day to all mothers. And I'm going to give that a try with the depth map. But it might be a little too funky to make that work because of the detail. It's again, it's a scan of a 16 millimeter. But I'm going to give it a shot. So again, on behalf of all of us here, happy Mother's Day to all mothers. And this is Johnny Laser signing off. I'll see you at the end of the after party. I'm headed to our VR lounge now. Fair warning to all you folks.